All right, today we are interviewing Vince Dow, YouTuber and Christian conservative political commentator.
He has catapulted himself to online stardom through his viral interview with Vice and his entertaining online personality.
This is our first episode, so thank you, Vince. We're honored to have such a big name to share the stage with for our first episode here.
And without further ado, here's Vince Dow.
When did you start getting on camera and whatnot?
Well, really, I've been trying to be a YouTuber since like fourth grade. Like I watched like KSI and all that stuff, and I wanted to be like a gaming YouTuber. And so I deleted the channel because it's embarrassing. But if someone has the ability to go very deep dive in the Internet Archives, you could probably find middle school me trying to be like a gaming YouTuber. It's very bad, but like that gave me on camera experience for quite a long time. And then in ninth grade, I did a broadcast journalism class and started thinking I wanted to do that. I wanted to be like a TV anchor. And then I became opinionated, and here we are. And this is what I decided to end up doing. So,
well, you're doing a great job at it. I mean,
yeah, I appreciate it.
100K subs at 19 is pretty impressive. And
appreciate it. Yeah.
Yeah. That was pretty cool. But you want to hop back over to where we were in like the...
Sorry. Okay. Actually, I do have one more question just because of my own curiosity. How many of those, like what, you're at 100K right now on YouTube? Is that like your biggest? I think you have like 150 followers on like Instagram or something.
Yeah. Instagram's the biggest one. Yeah.
How many like followers like across the board did you get after your viral Vice hit? I'm just curious.
It's hard to track directly, but I think on YouTube, actually, the first wave of Vice wasn't a lot. It was like a couple thousand. But then a lot of the shorts from that panel, like a month later, like in January, took off massively. And then obviously in the Daily Wire and stuff like that. So at first, it was only about a couple thousand. And then because the shorts and because of the exposure from all the different outlets, then it ended up being something probably like 50,000. I'd have to estimate somewhere in that ballpark just from Vice alone. So yeah, it's crazy.
Okay, yeah, I was just curious. We can go back to Andrew Tate now.
That is a massive jump start, though. 50K is unbelievable.
That's really good. Yeah, you killed it on the Vice.
Yeah, that was
appreciate it.
That was amazing. How did you get that interview, by the way, or how did you get on the panel? And like, what was the process of how that worked?
Yeah, I don't know. They must have just found me from social media or something, and then they interviewed me for the panel. And it's funny because originally they wanted me to do a masculinity panel, which I guess the Asian one, I suppose, fits better, whatever. But they interviewed me for that and ended up, but like last minute, they were like, hey, let's put you on the Asian. I was like, well, that's not what you told me we were doing. But yeah, I ended up going on that one. I didn't really want to do that panel. Funny story, because it's not an issue I talk about a lot, the sort of Asian identity stuff. Like I'm not one of those content creators that really makes like my race a big part of my brand or whatever. And so they were asking me these questions in an interview, and I didn't really know how to even answer some of them because I'm just like, I don't know, I don't really think or care about these issues very often. But I feel like that's part of what made the dynamic on the panel very good because I don't make my brand into constantly trying to argue with like woke people about, well, that's not really racially oppressive or whatever. I just went into it like, okay, well, here's what I think. Here's the way it is. And then they were like mind blown. And then, there was I was standing pretty firm in that. Right. So I think it made for a good dynamic.
Yeah, that probably made you a better candidate because you don't make like race like a whole thing, but that just made you perfect for it. Because I mean, you're spitting straight facts the whole time. It's great.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, and the masculinity panel didn't go as viral from what I saw. So it actually
it was boring. It was boring.
Yeah, it worked in
probably
your favor.
You weren't there. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Maybe it was because whoever you were was going to be the virality. But yeah, it's funny. It's a good segue actually on the masculinity panel. So as we mentioned earlier, like, we saw you covered Andrew Tate and stuff like that and what's going on with that trial. Definitely mention your thoughts about, the Tate brothers and their just absolute, rise to stardom out of nowhere. And what that kind of, I don't know, maybe signifies that there's like a lack of masculinity in culture, or at least it's been denigrated, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think it's very clear that, the Tate brothers speak to a very disaffected audience of young men who, feel all of the things that he kind of talks about, right? And there was a total gap in that or something was lacking in that. And so whatever people's criticisms of them are, Andrew Tate never created the problems or whatever that he diagnoses, but he's a guy who comes along and I think gives men, like, whatever criticisms you have of him in this regard or that regard, I think generally gives them a generally positive message, which is that, no one is coming to save you, essentially, right? Men in the world are based on their functional utility. And so you have to become a functional and competent man, and you have to work hard for yourself, and you have to create value for yourself. And, frankly, the sort of masculine imperative is not to quote unquote be emotional, right? It is to control your emotions, and kind of stand up and be a man and all of that. And don't be a loser. Don't be effeminate. Don't be a simp. Like, I think all of those general messages that he pushes on young men, whatever it falls short, I still think it's pretty objective that it's a huge net positive from what men are being fed by the mainstream culture. And I think that's why a lot of men gravitate to them. And I think that's why the system views him as a threat, because, the second that men do stick up for themselves, what happens? Revolutions happen, mass upheavals happen. So, yeah.
I think like the other thing, he gets a lot of hate, obviously, because he says some pretty controversial things. But I think what you were saying is true. That generally speaking, like, I think he is. You can agree with things people say and not uphold the person as a whole as some icon or idol, or you don't have to agree with everything. Generally speaking, though, he is speaking a message of more masculinity, which I think is a net positive, especially in a world where it's like trying to be, pushed down all the time. And I think that's kind of actually why Tate has gone so viral recently, is because there's none of that anymore. Like, aren't people speaking out about masculinity, that Tate has taken it to an extreme because he has to. It has to be done. Like,
right. Well, that's kind of how, in the age of the internet, like you say, he's over the top. Well, everyone on the internet is over the top. Yeah. Everyone is expressive, whatever. But then I would also say, I think a lot of people, and this was me for a while, honestly, too, but when they got thrown in jail, I actually started looking into him because I wasn't super familiar. And I was like, what is it about this guy that the system clearly seems to have a problem with? And I think, frankly, I think a lot of people have a false image of him, that all he ever talks about is like, just have a bunch of sex with women, beat up women, whatever it is. And when you actually sit down and listen to a lot of what the guy says, it's really more like, get in the gym, train, which, strong body, strong mind. No one is coming to save you. You have to work hard. You have to create value for yourself. Like, I think that actually in many ways is Tate's overall message. And I think that's obviously a net positive message for young men, and something a lot of young men need to hear, especially our generation. Because let's face it, we're so, addicted to the internet and things are so easy. Like, a lot of Gen Z is lazy. That is something that people get correct, that the older people assess and is correct. I think about how much time I waste in a day just scrolling through social media, all this stuff. And it's like, I think, a lot of young men in our generation, they need a kick in the butt. They need a slap in the face in a loving way. And I think that's what Andrew Tate is. And that's why he kind of wakes up a lot of people on that front.
Yeah. In some ways, Andrew Tate is the collective, I don't even know the right way to say this, but like the embodiment of like the collective masculine unconscious in a lot of ways, because like the average guy nowadays is getting hit from so many different angles and is essentially like a lot of times they're powerless. They're, there's obviously like a sexless crisis going on, kind of like a marriageless relationship crisis that, obviously you can see that manifested in like Fresh and Fit or, Pearl, if you know who she is, or even like the Whatever podcast, that kind of thing. And they just feel powerless at their jobs, and they're getting attacked politically, attacked just from society in so many different angles, that like somebody steps in there and just says like, take power, take back control of your life, ultimately through responsibility. And I think that's the big thing, is like, and that's what we would preach too, is just, it's like responsibility is true. To gain back that meaning and that real like responsible power in your own life and in the community and society and whatever, which builds up a strong nation. And so,
I say this too, and I've been saying this more recently, is that we as conservatives, we need like conservative millionaires and billionaires. We need our own people to go out there, and because money is power in the world, obviously. And I kind of look at the way things are right now. You know, most of the elite, most of the millionaires, billionaires are people like George Soros, Bill Gates, people who are just not on our side funding. They're the enemy. They're funding the enemy. And it's like, we can sit here and complain from a political perspective, but what are we going to ever be able to do unless we have equal wealth or greater wealth? Wealth, again, is power, greater power to fight back against them. Because we can say, oh, well, let's elect a Republican president and go after their wealth or whatever. But guess what? They have all the politicians in their pocket. They have more money than us. They can buy off more politicians. They will, like, money will always be power in that regard. And so I look at it like, yeah, we can sit around and complain about that, but until we create wealth and power for ourselves on our side, that's on our side, there's going to be no way to fight back against that. And I think Andrew Tate, sort of in regards to masculinity, his message is like, this is the system, this is the world. You can complain about it, but you're not going to be able to change it. So here's how you have to take power and win the game. And I think that overall mentality, the more because, you know, I spent a lot of my younger years being a conservative, just complaining about the system and all that. But now that I get older, I start to realize, like, we have to find a way to beat the system at its own game, right? And I think that mentality that he kind of puts in young men of like, no one's coming to save you, you have to figure this out for yourself, I think is good for like everyone, basically.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. And I think like the left hates that too. I think a lot of people hate that when you see somebody like Tate kind of winning in a way. And that of course they're going to come after him.
Right.
I mean, same thing is happening with Trump right now.
Right.
You know, Trump, I think in the very beginning, the same thing was true. Like you were saying about conservative millionaires, like money is power. All of a sudden, like a conservative, like Trump way back like in 2016 or whatever, Trump starts, you know, he's got a lot of money. He comes out as a conservative and he throws his hat in the ring. And all of a sudden, you know, now everybody hates him, when just a few weeks before he threw his hat in the ring, he was loved by everybody. He was loved by the left. He was loved by the right. He was loved by moderates. He's a huge talk show host. He was just an icon for America, as like, he was like this huge celebrity personality. And then all of a sudden, you know, he says, you know what? I'm conservative. I'm going to run for president. And all of a sudden everyone hates him. So it's an interesting dynamic how that switches so fast.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think, you know, you look at someone like Donald Trump, he's a prime example of that, of the fact that for someone to really come along and stand up to the system and run like a truly anti-establishment in both parties in 2016, especially campaign, you can't do that from the inside, right? Your career politician, even if you have the best intentions, like it's hard because, you know, campaigns are finance, right? You need money, you need power, you need wealth and resources and connections. And, you know, I'm sure you're vaguely familiar. I'm not in the GOP, but I hear stories, I see it. It's very hard to do that unless you're a guy like Donald Trump, who is independently wealthy, independently powerful. And then you can come along and change things. But until you free the matrix, but until you have like independence for yourself, it's hard to fight back against the system when you're kind of just a cog in the wheel for it. It's difficult. It's genuinely difficult, right? So, I
definitely think there are like whether it's politicians or whoever you want to say, someone above them and playing in the shadows. I don't know. They like to move around the chess pieces themselves, and when they see somebody, you know, coming in that they can't control or that starting to move their own chess pieces, then, you know, I think they start to get worried and they start to, okay, well, hold on now. Let me move the chess pieces. And I think people like Andrew Tate and maybe Donald Trump are people like that who don't play by the rules that elite class wants them to play by.
Well, that's why we need a whole side of the chessboard for ourselves, right? We have a few pawns, so we don't have the whole set. They have the whole set, so that's what we need.
That's true. What do you think about Trump's arrest these days?
Oh yeah.
I mean, I basically have the same take as most people. Obviously, political, corrupt. In many ways, it's kind of the end of the republic as we know it, which is a dramatic statement. I feel like people say all the time, but it is really true, right? The indictment of a former president, that's never something we've seen before, and I think perhaps even worse than in the past. With Trump, I think now we're really moving into the era of just politics of revenge, that the entire kind of basis of politics is going to be reward who you support and punish your enemies. You know, it's going to be this very partisan, very divisive thing. And kind of getting back to the discussion we said before, I mean, obviously we can complain about that. It's not an ideal political system, obviously. But I think also with that in mind, conservatives need to understand, well, you know, like we've been talking about, this is the game now, and we need to figure out how to win it for ourselves and play it for ourselves, right? But
yeah, and you mentioned guys like George Soros, and we saw like DeSantis come out and kind of combat some of the things he's done financially. Yeah, he's an interesting character too, because like he'll fund, you know, communist-esque stuff in America, and then in other countries he like will fund anti-communist stuff. So you wonder like what are his actual intentions of doing stuff like that. Obviously he's a big funder of Black Lives Matter, these kind of things.
I think he probably just wants to see the downfall of America. Then I'd have to imagine, or the downfall of the West, and so he knows it's what's destroying it, right?
Yeah, no. When people say like, or you say like, oh, they want to divide and conquer us, and they say who? Like who's the they? Like that's one of the they. You know what I mean? It's like that is guy with. I don't think he has good intentions, and I can say that like pretty clearly.
And I think like there's something to be said for. They want the downfall of America, et cetera, et cetera. I also think a huge part of it is they are playing for their own sake. Like I think there's a lot of people, especially on the left, people in power, elites, who are strictly playing for their own benefit, and they just want to be at the top all the time. And so I think maybe they're competing with even each other. They're all just playing the selfish game of money and power, and it's just affecting us. It's affecting America. It's affecting society as a whole. Sometimes even the world. When these politicians are just, I want to be in power, so I'm going to do what's best for me, not thinking about what's around them or what that downstream effect is having on us.
I mean, maybe, but I think someone like George Soros is just genuinely evil, because what does he have to profit from, like, you know, funding a bunch of DAs that are going to just tear down all these cities? I mean, I don't know. Maybe he has investments in like rural property. I don't know what it is, but I don't really see the strong connection. I feel like he's just a figure who wants to see chaos and just wants to see the downfall of civilization. It is true to a large extent that if you're someone who's trying to sell the product, right, you're a rich businessman or whatever, you know, the best thing for you is to get people addicted to your product. And so maybe perhaps a society of like weak-minded kind of consumerist brains, to an extent that does kind of help your money and profit. I don't know if people even think that far ahead, but I look at someone like George Soros, I'm like, I think the guy is genuinely just an evil person. Like, I don't know if there's even a money or power thing for it. He's giving up his own money just to see civilization crash and burn. I don't know.
Well, yeah, there's definitely part of it that's like a divide and conquer, like a house divided cannot stand kind of a thing. And there's, you know, very few people that, you know, like are like him that can run, you know, that really maneuver chess pieces behind the scenes, like Carter was saying. And if people really unite against something like that, then like things like the WF would like never be possible. You know what I mean?
I think about it. Here's the thing too. What do all of these corporations have to gain from like going woke or whatever? Because they lose money. The best thing to do is just to stay neutral, right? You don't talk about it all. That's the best profit. But like Bud Light, they know they're going to lose money. I mean, there's no possible angle to which bringing on, you know, that transformer is going to, you know, bring profit into the company. It makes it like it's boneheaded. But I don't know, unless they're trying to raise the ESG score, which I guess is a possibility. I think in most cases they just genuinely want to push a social agenda, because I don't see the profit in any of this stuff.
There's definitely not.
Well, let me ask you this, like, and that's where exactly I was going to segue into, is it ties in well with the Bush story, where Anheuser-Busch, obviously, that, you know, while they do that, obviously they've been, you know, promoting their product on like NFL and obvious places where their user base is. And then they go ahead and do something like this that's completely self-sabotaging, and they know that. So the question is why? And like a lot of these companies do that against their own interest. And, you know, obviously there's this new capitalism coming through the World Economic Forum called stakeholder capitalism, where it's like it completely altered. We don't need to go down that route, but there's also companies like BlackRock and Vanguard that buy up the majority with shares of these companies and things like that. And I think that's a big Trojan horse for ESG and pretty much a lot of this nonsense we're seeing coming down the pipeline on the social front. So first of all, do you see that as being the case? And second of all, what is the way to combat something like that? Is it government? Is it regulation? Like, what would you have to say about that?
Yeah, I think that it definitely is probably one of the big sources causing it. And I'm very concerned by a lot of these firms like BlackRock and stuff. I don't know what the necessarily easiest solution is, but I mean, I would think that in some way the government has to step in, whether that's just abolishing all this ESG stuff, not recognizing it. Maybe that's probably a place to start. But I do look at a lot of the behavior of BlackRock, and I see, like, I don't know if it's antitrust action or whatever needs to be done, but, you know, I see them, for instance, buying up American real estate. That's very concerning. Yeah, real estate is finite. Bill Gates buying up a lot of farmland. Like, I do think that something needs to be done to stop all these entities from just hogging up. And apparently, like you say, they're buying shares of companies too, just basically trying to take over the US economy, right? Yeah. Obviously monopolize stuff. I don't know. I'm not an expert on it. I don't know what the exact action there is, but I think something should be done. Probably.
Yeah, definitely. So the question is really like, can we come in the system and change the system, or are we better like exiting and building something new? And I think there's kind of, conservatives are split. Pretty much people that are anti-establishment are split on that front, because you can make a strong case for saying that the system isn't salvageable, and there's too many bad apples. There's too much corruption. It's a bloated bureaucracy. This, that, and the other thing. Well, what do you think is kind of the way out? You think it's obviously you made allusions earlier to you want to infiltrate and propagate the conservative worldview.
I mean, I think that any change realistically that happens in this country would first have to be sparked by some type of political end, whether that's Donald Trump coming along or someone like that and running for office, whatever it is. And so I think it would be a mistake to completely just abandon the system or retreat from the system. But I do think we need to do something sort of tactical where we sort of back out of it for a little bit, while, like I said, like we need to do stuff like build wealth, gain the knowledge, gain experience, whatever it is. And once we have that, I mean, yeah, we have to basically just retake the system from that end. So I don't think that, I think it would be a mistake to just totally withdraw from the system and kind of just wait for it all to collapse, because there's no guarantee of it collapsing. Who's going to say that? But I do think that in order to infiltrate or take back the system effectively, like I said, we're going to need resources of our own. And so I think to an extent, kind of waiting to gather those resources first while still being involved in it, still being involved in politics, still doing all that stuff, but also independently trying to, make money or learn how some of this stuff works or whatever it is. And then kind of taking that and then using that experience to go in and take back the system instead of just doing it blindly, I think is kind of the best option for us.
Yeah. And go ahead, read the system.
Oh, I was going to, do you ever see yourself getting into politics?
So me personally, I have very little aspiration to run for office. It's just something I've never wanted to do. I feel like my role in this whole thing is to be a speaker, to be in the media, whatever. But I mean, wherever God takes me, I guess if I decided it was the calling, then I would do it. But I don't see myself as a politician. I don't know. I'm kind of short. I'm like 5'8". People are gonna make fun of the short Asian guy. Thinks he's like important, whatever.
Conservative Yang.
Conservative Yang. Well, he loses all his elections, so that's an issue. Little Asian guy, But I don't know. We'll see. We'll see on that front.
Yeah, but you're definitely right about kind of what we need to do going forward. I definitely see the same picture as you, and maybe the answer is building parallel systems too. Like you see, like now Peterson's having his own university and stuff like that, where everyone complains about all these universities are so liberal, this, that, and the other thing. Our University of Austin is another good example of where, okay, well, let's do something about it. Let's build a parallel system that we can, the people that have our worldview can go into and not be indoctrinated into this woke nonsense. You know what I mean? So.
And you think about it practically, probably if done correctly, you can teach them how to actually be competent, because most universities are not adequately training people for their selected fields, right? And this is why a lot of employers say these graduates these days, they don't know anything about anything, right? They don't know how to think. They don't know anything. And so I think also if you provide a better education over time, your people are going to win in the market when you think about it, right? Because they'll be more competitive. They'll be smarter. It might take some time to to build up the name recognition of those schools. What is Peterson University? But over time, you give a good education, I think genuinely it can take us farther and it give us, that sort of power, that edge. So
yeah, the public school system and the universities, like all of that is just a whole can of worms in and of itself. They're just, it's a scam at this point, how much money they're just taking from students and offering basically nothing in return. Unless you're getting a degree in some sort of medical field of some kind, it's a useless degree. You generally learn nothing. And if you were to just get a job right out of high school, you'd probably be better off.
Yeah, I mean, see, my thing on it is that to some degree, I think if conservatives do want to like reclaim, for instance, academia, someone out there has to go through the system and go be a professor. Now, maybe they go to Liberty or Peterson University or whatever it is, and maybe that's an alternative solution to it. But so I do think that some people in our sphere do have to go to college, but you're absolutely right. As an economic decision, for most people, it is quite stupid. I'm lucky I go to school for free, because if not, I'd be very upset about that.
And and I'm not bashing on the. I mean, if you think that you should get an education through college, like go for it. But there's definitely like even 20, 30, 50 years ago, it was a better decision.
Yeah,
it was cheaper,
this very orthodox thinking of like, you got to go to school. Why? Well, because you have to. But it doesn't. There's actually no logical. It's like it's circular logic. You have to go to school because you have to get an education. Okay, but what's the economic value in the education? No one can explain.
Individual
circle. So I mean, yeah, I definitely think as an economic decision, it's a scam for the most part. So definitely try to figure out how for it to be affordable. Don't put the big value on the school or whatever. I think stuff like that is probably the good advice.
Yeah, definitely. And really all they have left to offer is like the merit, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And kind of the status. And there's
which I think is going to decline over the next few decades.
That's what I was going to say.
Because people are starting to realize how useless the college graduates are,
Yeah, and you can seamlessly, like endlessly educate yourself online, because it's all the information is there. All these textbooks are there. You almost wonder, you go to some of these classes, I don't know if you're having this experience or not, but it's like you're going through a textbook that you could have gone through on your own. You know what I mean? At whatever it is, McGraw-Hill, or just, whatever classes you're taking. So it's interesting. And there's experts in every field that have their own stuff they can teach you for much cheaper. And so, and the merit is going away too, because it's like the people realize, and they're waking up to the fact that these institutions are just failing us. So
I'll tell you this. I took an entrepreneurship class one time in college. I believe it was like a 4,000 level class. I learned nothing. Okay. Nothing useful for actually starting a business or being an entrepreneur, but literally just random YouTube videos of people who are successful millionaires or billionaires. And here's how I approach business. Here's how I think about it. 10 minutes, learn more than a whole semester for 4,000 level class. It's insane. Yeah. It's true too. It's crazy.
Yeah, the same thing happened to me. I was going to school for a little bit, and I dropped out after I realized that I was in these graphic design classes, and I was in these film classes. And I was like, oh, this is fun. And then I met a coworker at where I was working at the time, and sitting down and talking to my coworker for 20 minutes, I learned so much more about the industry than I did in the entire half semester that I've been learning graphic design and film and all this stuff. All he did was just show me how to actually do it. And I learned so much in the course of my career working alongside people who knew what they were doing than, having somebody lecture me on, how to set up lights and whatnot.
Well, the thing is, a lot of times you can teach yourself this stuff and teach yourself better. The thing is, though, is that the reason the school system has to exist and university has to exist is because it's basically tailored to like the middle IQ people who have very little drive. Like they're smart enough to do it perhaps, but they have very little drive or ambition or kind of like self-thought to go and do that stuff. And so they need to sit down, the professor write it on the whiteboard, get grades. Because without any of that, they wouldn't actually learn anything or do anything for themselves, right? And so this is the reason why the university system is stuck existing, is like people smart enough, they're not low IQ because they're smart enough to get in, but they're mid IQ because they're not smart enough to like think for themselves. They're smart enough to think, but they're not smart enough to think for themselves. That's really the way college is for a lot of people.
I definitely think there's a laziness aspect there too.
Yeah.
Most of the people, like I've met a lot of professors who are not as passionate about their job and their field of study than some, just colleagues that I've met in the industry who are much more passionate and just love the job. Whereas a lot of professors, at least that I've experienced, are just there to, do their 9 to 5.
Well, that's why they're professors, because the people who love their job, what are they doing? They're going and starting businesses. They're working. They're doing something. But the professor is the person, and the school teacher is the person who just wants to collect the pension and collect the said income, write on a whiteboard, do the same thing. The robots, right? And so, but that's a part of the problem with the education system. How are you going to learn from the person who, like, for instance, entrepreneurship? I don't blame my entrepreneurship professor, because how are you going to learn how to run or start a business from a person who has never run or started a business and literally needs the government to manage his retirement because he's that incompetent or lazy with money? He doesn't want to do it himself. You're never going to learn really from these people. It's sad. Waste of time, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, I was a business student, and I thought the same thing. None of them have businesses. And so it's like, well, I mean, how much can I really learn from you? Obviously, we can go through this textbook together, and then, I definitely had this joke where it was, I went to college to study finance, to learn that going to college was a bad financial decision. It's just true. I mean, you don't get as much bang for your buck as you do back in the old days. And I think since 1980, the tuition on average has tripled, or might have been quadrupled. And obviously it hasn't gotten 4 times as valuable. And so that was one of the things that we spoke about Yang, that Yang really hit on hard and said, stuff like that needs to change, and we need to reduce the amount of administrative bloat. And I thought that was a really interesting point. Interesting guy as well.
Yes. Sometimes Yang gets it right occasionally.
Very smart guy and had interesting views. I also don't think he was too establishment. What do you make of a guy like that? Do you see him as in the renegade category, like Trump and Andrew Tate and the people we mentioned earlier, or do you see somebody who's propagating a worldview that's going to be detrimental to the country?
I mean, I don't agree with everything he believes in. I think he has genuine intentions. At least that's the vibe I get. Like, he genuinely wants to help the world and stuff like that. But I think I know he has his own party now, but I think for a while he was sort of naive to think that, the Democratic Party, or running in that or operating in that, was the solution. It was never going to be the solution. Tulsi Gabbard, same thing. It's like, and not to say that the Republican Party is perfect either in this regard, because it's not. But, anyone who has genuine ideas and says, I want to fix the world in this way or that way, that's not what the Democratic Party for the last decade has, or probably more than that, has ever been. It's all about, this diversity quota, that. No, well, Andrew Yang, you have all these smart ideas, but don't you know who was the front runner in the race for a while? Kamala Harris. Well, she's a black woman. So what are you going to say about that? So I think in short, Andrew Yang, don't agree with all of his ideas. Some of them are interesting, genuinely, but he has too many ideas for the party he was running in. So I think that's his problem.
So you put out a video not too long ago, kind of very critical of Destiny, the online streamer, leftist streamer, about his blue hair, and that it's he and all the people of his kind are not to be taken seriously because of their their clown head. Yeah, obviously there are definitely some comedic through lines in that, but I don't know.
What do you think about Destiny?
What do you think about Destiny? Dude's a fierce debater, and I think he's definitely is a smart man. Obviously, it needs to be said, I don't agree with him on everything. Not that anybody should, but what do you make about a guy like Destiny? Would you debate him in the future?
I mean, see, the grounds under which I would debate someone like Destiny is if I had like an equal audience, because otherwise, what do you really have to gain from it? Because his audience is mostly like people on the left or liberals or whatever, and you know, these, it's not like I'm going in and actually going to change Destiny's mind or whatever. And so it would have to be some kind of like equal motto thing. And so I would not, for instance, like go on his channel and be stuck in his environment to debate, maybe on like neutral ground or something like that.
Yeah.
But I did say in that video about Destiny, he is the most tolerable of RedTube or whatever, right? He's like, you know, he's, I honestly, sometimes I think he does fall into the same trap of RedTube, which is the guy's just like a nerd sometimes, you know, like actually like that behavior, but he does not exert that behavior as bad as someone like a Hunter Avalon. And so I'll give him credit there. But yeah, I mean, on the blue hair front, it is kind of satirical, but it does raise also a genuine point, which is, because liberals do this a lot. They dye their hair crazy colors, and then you show up to the debate expecting to be taken seriously. It's like, you look like a child on Halloween, right? And so it's, you know, I just feel like it's a violation of like basic decorum, like, because every time I watch Destiny with his new blue hair, I'm just like, I can't listen to the guy. I'm just staring at his hair. Is that just me? I'm like, the guy, you got blue hair, and you're like talking seriously, dropping facts and statistics. Like, I can't listen to that, and most people can't, I think. And it's you can say, oh, that's illogical, you know, that's ad hominem, whatever it is, but this is the reality of human nature. Like, optics do matter, presentation does matter, it matters in politics too. And so I can sit here and pretend as if I'm just as people just, you know, listen to the facts and logic of everything, but it's not actually how real human beings operate, and really nor should they, because we are partially emotional creatures, we are partially visual creatures. And so I think in the presentation of anything, those things actually do matter, and someone who visibly does not take themselves that seriously shouldn't be taken that seriously either.
There's definitely something to be said for presentation, whether you say it's consciously or subconsciously. People judge other people. It's instant. You know, you see somebody wearing black tie, you know, that you automatically have some sort of, you know, maybe it's subconscious respect for that person if they're standing amongst a bunch of people in hoodies and t-shirts. There is something, you know, to be said for that presentation, for sure. I don't doubt that at all. Yeah,
and I mean, how far does the Chad homonym philosophy go? You know what I mean? Because like, do we take it all the way to tattoos? I mean, do we take it? You know what I mean? Obviously, you're a Christian conservative man who you know, dresses nice on your show and everything like that. Like, you know, how far? Because the question is really like, you know, you can ad hominem almost anybody that you want to, but at the end of the day, it is kind of dismissive, and you know, it's the opposite of like steel manning somebody else's position, or somebody who, obviously, I mean, Destiny's gained a lot of notoriety in the space, rightly so, for being a, you know, smart man who's, you know, he's a good debater as well. So I don't know. Explain your Chad homonym philosophy a little bit, and how all the realms that goes into.
The philosophy is it's ad hominem when everyone else does it. It's Chad homonym when I do it. That's the philosophy. No, but I think it really is sort of a, you know it when you see it type of thing. Sort of like, you know, the Supreme Court ruling in the 50s. You know, I remember on obscenity, it's like, you know it when you see it. That's that sort of terminology. The reason I sort of push this stuff is that, you know, it's really not even about Destiny. I look at someone like Hunter Avalon, for instance, who it's just like, he's just a ridiculous individual, and frankly, he's just like a nerd, right? And I look at like something back in like the 80s or whatever, you know, high school bullies used to like make fun of these people, right? And they used to kind of just be ridiculed and kept in check in that regard. And I think to some degree, you know, if we are going to sort of like normalize human behavior as the way it used to be, that's not all going to be done through a sort of fact by fact, here's why you're wrong sort of type of thing. You know, the fact of the matter is that for kind of a long time in our existence as humans, we have rightly used ridicule as a response to just simply the ridiculous. And I think to some degree, like that type of stuff is necessary. For instance, the pronouns in bio. Here's another example of it. You know, yes, it's technically a logical fallacy if you see someone on Twitter and they say something stupid to say pronouns in bio. You know, like that's actually not technically like a logical sound argument, but the kind of social effect of just ridiculing the ridiculous can be effective to our ends, and I think is something we have to do in such a ridiculous world very often. So that's sort of why I kind of have created this philosophy of the Chad homonym and why it's a necessary thing sometimes. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but does it sway the people over to the conservative side is the question, because there's definitely people like to say that like people don't get swayed through debate, through conversation. I just don't think that's true whatsoever. People hop over in different positions all the time, the more they get educated and persuaded. That being said, but you know what I mean? Is it to not steelman somebody's point like that is definitely a way, like when the left ridicules you, it makes you stronger. And in the same way as a lot of other conservative talk show hosts. So I don't know exactly the effectiveness of the chat homonyms.
Well, here's the thing. You're thinking through the perspective of a political person who actually sits down and listens to these things. Your average drone in the world does not think things through that much. Really, like, think of how many normal people out there, their opinions are just formed by the friends around them or whatever. Like, it really is that simple. And there's something to be said about how when you just hear people say or do things, human beings, most people will just naturally mimic or copy that behavior. And so there is a large extent to which if we rightly and properly kind of push back in culture and manage to have certain ideas and whatnot viewed to be ridiculous or viewed to just be totally unserious, there's something to be said about how many just average people who don't think a lot about these things will kind of just go along with whatever is popular and disregard that which is unpopular, right? And so the pronoun stuff, you could point that as to one culture where they're trying to normalize it. A lot of people aren't going to think consciously about this stuff. They're just going to see, oh, everyone else does it, well, I'm going to do it. Well, if we push back and say that's stupid to do, they might, and we say that to the people around our circles who don't think a lot about these things, they will literally, because like I said, a lot of people are just drones. They're just going to be like, oh, okay, well, I guess I'm not doing that, right? And so I think that's sort of the type of people you reach with the chat homonym or like bullying. It's not the people who are very in depth and thinking about everything. It's more so about creating social norms, right? If you create if something is a social norm where people just say, we don't do this, it's ridiculous. How many people actually sit down and question every single social norm that exists? Do you really sit down and think, why is this considered normal, not normal? Or they just do it because it's considered normal and it'd be stupid or ridiculous not to do it. And so I think to reach a lot of worker drone NPCs hypes who don't think a lot about things, it's going to take more than just sitting around and debunking everything, because they're not going to listen. They don't care. They just have to they just go based on whatever's perceived to be normal. And so we have to use more emotional, less logical tactics like that to create the perception of what is normal and what is not, is what I think.
Well, I also think there's definitely like Matt Walsh's Twitter feed is probably my favorite thing in existence.
Oh yeah.
Just the fact that he calls out people's pronouns in their bio all the time. It's so funny to me. I do think there's, for that kind of it is definitely a time and a place. Like, obviously, you calling out people on Twitter is one thing. You probably wouldn't say the same thing if you were both standing up on stage in a formal debate.
If you're in like a 2-hour long debate on a college campus, they're not going to say, oh, you have blue hair. But in the setting of the internet and the very quick form attention world, like stuff like this, I think it can be rhetorically effective to some to point out, you know what I mean? And also, here's the other thing I would say is that sitting down and addressing everything as serious gives those things some degree of seriousness and credibility in themselves, right? Which, depending on where the Overton window moves in the culture, sometimes you just have to do. But I think on the things that are emerging, such as the pronouns, like it's not legally mandated for everyone to do yet, which I'm sure it will be. While we still have the time where we can convince people it's just ridiculous and they shouldn't accept it or take it seriously, you have to sort of try your best to use that or do that. Because eventually, you're going to have to sit down and explain logically, here's why you shouldn't declare your pronouns to people and write out a freaking thesis about it. But doing that suggests that it is a normal idea that has to be like debunked step by step, right? Because it's an idea that is in itself perceived to be serious. And so I think for a lot of ideas that the left has already made mainstream, we have no choice. But on those that are emerging, we have to try to do our best to just swat it down at the source, right? And if we fail to do that, then sure, then sit down and debate all these different questions. But I think when something is still small and starting out, it's more effective to simply ridicule it than give it the credibility of letting it be taken seriously and give it that greater sort of exposure, if that makes sense.
Yeah, there's something to be said for like a social norm, and I don't think social norms are bad things at all. There's kind of sometimes there's that mentality of go against the grain, go against the social norm. Like it's good. Like it's okay to be weird. Sometimes it's really not. I mean, there are social norms for a reason, and there are social standards for a reason. And so, and especially like the pronouns thing, the blue hair, for instance, whatever you want to say, that has not been, that's only the social norm up until 5-10 years ago. Before that, if you saw anybody with pronouns in their bio or introducing themselves with their pronouns or walking around with blue hair or whatever 10, 15, 20 years ago, it would be so strange. Like that's just not normal back then. And so it would be normal to call those people out and be like, why are you doing that? That would be normal. Now,
if you respond with a reaction of like, what? Why did you do that? What did you just do? Keep in mind, a lot of these people are sort of mentally fragile too. So they'll be like, oh, okay, I guess I won't do that again. You know what I mean? Like that's kind of what I'm trying to go for in culture more so, because like long term, it's sort of what we have to do, right? In order to get the masses to move back in the other direction. You have to just be like, that's stupid. Why are you doing that? And a lot of people who don't even think about this stuff are like, well, I don't know. I guess I won't do it again. That's what I'm trying to go for. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Like I used to work for a guy named Lex Friedman, who was the exact opposite of that. Would always giving the devil his due, always steel manning positions, stuff like that. Never judgmental calls. But then like somebody like Matt Walsh would be like, what are you doing? Like this is a culture war. Like, and ridicule is a sword.
Yeah, we just don't like grand scheme. We don't have time to take every single position or person seriously. You know what I mean? And so sometimes you just have to. What's wrong with you? Move on. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, there's definitely a case to be made for that. And like, what's more, the left is definitely playing by different rules, whereas like a lot of the right will be like, let's only engage peacefully, nice. And let's not ever do any of these tactics like that we're just mentioning right now. But the problem is, if somebody else is at war and you're just trying to play by, the nice rule, that's a recipe for a loss. And that's part of why the left has taken so much ground in this culture war. And so it's interesting. I don't know necessarily if the Chad homonym philosophy is our war tactic, but it's definitely an interesting point to be made. That's definitely split within the conservative movement. I think even within institutions in the conservative and Republican establishment.
Well, getting back to the discussion in the beginning, right? And that's a good point you bring up. We can either complain about the game or we can play to win the game that's being given and handed to us. So the chessboard that's in front of us, right? And so that's sort of the approach I'm saying is that, especially, I mean, look at them. Do they take all of our ideas seriously? Do they, good faith, sit down with all of us? And so, you have to kind of just play the game as it's given, in my opinion, which is why I say sometimes that type of stuff is necessary.
You definitely have to be playing the game that's been put in front of you while simultaneously building a separate game so that they can play your game eventually, kind of a thing, for sure.
Right. But if you win this game, then you're in charge and you can figure out what the next game is.
This is a great analogy.
Right-wing authoritarianism. No, this plan. It's definitely right. It'd be interesting to see how it plays out. Hopefully, the right can unify a little more in their approach. I think that's definitely a tactical strategy that they're not utilizing as much. Whereas like the left, whatever you want to say about them, I mean, they're organized and they're
united,
effective at propagating their strategy and protesting and that kind of thing. Whereas like, right-wing people might be like, oh, they're crazy, but then they're not like, taking as much action. And so it's also because they're, they have jobs and they're running businesses and have capital and this, that, and the other thing. But, it's if you want your society and your institutions to, be free of wokeness and all the other leftist worldview, then yeah, you're definitely right. Infiltrate and infiltrate and propagate, I guess, is the way to go.
Yeah, absolutely.